Hashtag what's in my sewing bag. Welcome, friends. Now that I am about to take on some hand sewing projects, doing some reconstruction works, I feel like sharing with you the contents of my sewing bag, which are some of the most used items in my sewing room. So without further ado, let's take a peek at what's inside my sewing bag. First of all, if you don't know what this is called, seriously, this is my favorite tape measure that I pretty much use on all of my measurements and even in drafting. I don't usually use my rulers to mark out measurements, and thus I basically use them mainly for just plotting out lines, and I will still use my tape measure to mark. Simply because sometimes using different rulers can cause a slight deviation on my patterns, as they are not similarly accurate as what you can see here. So I only use one tool for precise measurements, and that is this tape measure. Next is some good set of hand sewing needles. Oh, behold this stunning vintage needle case that I got from our dear friend aliexpress.com, which is decent enough to hold and secure my needles so that they don't scatter inside my bag and attack me. I pretty much use this sharp size 10 needles. As you know, I don't machine sew my buttons, and instead I prefer hand sewing them. If you're looking for a small but efficient pair of scissors, this is it, my friends. I love using this. It's extremely sharp and lightweight. I use this mainly for snipping out threads, cutting up small fabric pieces, or when I'm grading seam allowances. It's a 2-inch embroidery scissor, nothing fancy, but this is my personal favorite. So, I am a big fan of glass head ball pins, or silk pins as what we call it. I always poke myself with this because they are super sharp and thin. Oh, and as a bonus, you can iron on them and they won't melt. But seriously, really, who irons over their pins? I don't. I love these, and ever since I started sewing, I can't bring myself to use any other pins anymore. One of the most used notion in my sewing bag is this heat-erasable marking pen. It's a Frixion pilot pen. No, this is not an advertisement, but I personally love this. I use this mostly for transferring markings onto my fabric, and best of all, it's heat-erasable. Just hover a hot iron and poof, the markings are gone. Okay, friends. I am not a big Thimble user. I still find it odd every time I try to use them, but in reality, they are extremely helpful. Because hand sewing for hours and hours is no fun without a thimble. The thimble is used on the middle finger of your dominant hand when hand sewing. Just make sure you're using the right size for you. Otherwise, you'll just slow down as it will keep coming off from your finger, and that's not helpful at all. It is given to have at least an all-purpose thread in my sewing bag for some sewing or basting. I love using this brand for hand sewing because the thread feels so smooth and almost lint-free. So I always keep at least a spool of a black and a white thread. Anything works fine, really. But whatever, you do you. If you love hand sewing, you will definitely love this. This is Beeswax by Dritz, and I use it to strengthen my threads, when I'm hand sewing buttons on shirts or pants or wherever. Plus, it keeps my thread from tangling. All you need to do is to run a strand of thread through the wax and you're ready to sew. Last but not the least, this is probably one of the very first notions I got when I started sewing. If this is unfamiliar to you, this is called a seam gauge and it works as a point turner too. I love using this, especially when taking quick measurements on small areas of my projects. I don't usually have a particular brand when it comes to buying sewing supplies. I rely more on practicality and how useful they are. As long as they serve their purpose, I will keep using them. Remember when we used to open up our grandmother's or mother's biscuit tin cans, only to surprisingly find sewing tools inside? Those are the days. Well, I prefer putting them in my own embroidered DIY sewing bag instead. So, what about you? What's in your sewing bag? Share it and tag me on Instagram at So It's Your Style. I want to see what's in yours. So, friends, this is it for now, and I'll be back with my next sewing project. But until then, happy sewing!